I podcast dell'ACIS, alla ricerca delle culture, storie, lingue e identità italiane, un articolo o libro alla volta. Episodio 5.
Welcome to the ACIS Podcast series. In search of Italian cultures, histories, languages, and identities, one article or book at a time. Each episode discusses a recent publication by Italianists working in Australia or Aotearoa. This is episode 5.
Benvenuti a tutte e tutti. I am Elia.
And I'm your co-host, Leah. Ciao. So, what fascinating Italian studies topic are we discussing today, Elia?
How about we talk about Venice, history, and music?
Sounds like a very compelling mix.
Indeed, Leah. You and I have just finished reading an article by Brigette de Poi on the 1630 plague in Venice. It offers such a fresh perspective on a well-documented event.
Yes, and I always thought the decline of Venice's music printing was solely due to the economic slump of the 1620s. Does her article challenge that?
Oh, yes, it does. De Poi's research shows that while the slump in the 1620s definitely hurt the industry, it was the plague that followed, which truly decimated the workforce and shattered the economic foundations of music printing. She argues it was this combination of factors, not just the slump, that led to the collapse.
That makes sense. But hadn't Venice faced plagues before? What made this one so different for the music industry?
That's a crucial point, and De Poi's article addresses it directly. She compares the 1630 plague with the earlier one in 1575. While the 1575 plague was also terrible, music printing never completely stopped. There was a noticeable dip in production, but it bounced back. In 1630, however, the presses came to a total halt for a full year. Imagine that. Imagine how the soundscape of Venice must have changed as a result of the stop. It would have impacted other sounds, music, steps, bells, voices, right? What do you think?
Yes, I think you are absolutely right. Brigette calls it the sound of silence, right? What's remarkable for me is that scholars have long noted an economic slowdown in the 1620s. But De Poi shows that the crisis of 1630 acted as a kind of fatal blow. The industry was stabilising, even recovering, right before the plague struck. And then, suddenly, the presses fell silent.
Yes.
You know, what I particularly liked about Brigette's work is her methodology. I know, I'm going to sound like a nerd, but hear me out.
Go on. I think I know what you're about to say.
Okay, here we go. I like how Brigette created a new expanded database by combining RISM, the Universal Short Title Catalogue, and several specialised catalogues of printed sacred music. This lets her trace yearly publication numbers for decades before and after the outbreak.
That's impressive.
And the findings are dramatic. In 1629, Venice printed 47 musical editions. In 1630, as the plague hit mid-year, output drops sharply to 29. But the real shock is 1631. Zero surviving music prints for the entire year. Incredible.
It's as if time went utterly quiet in Venice. Literally. Reminds me of Melbourne or Bergamo lockdowns.
Eerie.
Brigette even pinpoints the months. Nearly everything for 1630 was printed before July, before the plague took hold. After that, the presses essentially stopped. Even when printing resumed in 1632, the numbers remained very low.
Extraordinary. And here's where De Poi's argument becomes especially compelling. Even though the industry shows signs of revival around 1640, hitting 40 prints that year, the recovery doesn't last. After 1640, the decline is steep and irreversible.
That's right. And Brigette writes that this wasn't just because of the plague alone. It was the double impact of two crises occurring in close succession. The economic downturn of the 1620s, followed by a plague that halted production entirely. Printers lost workers, supply chains were disrupted, and key composers died, including prolific contributors like Alessandro Grandi.
Yes, that's right. The comparison with non-music printing is really revealing. Other forms of printing, pamphlets, books, did decline, but they never fully shut down. Those sectors eventually bounced back. The music printers, by contrast, never regained their footing.
A city without printed sounds? We could go on talking about this topic forever, but we are actually lucky to have Brigette herself tell us more about her work.
Yes! Andrea Rizzi, chair of ACIS, spoke with Brigette yesterday about her work. Let's hear them after a very short break.
Okay, here we are. I'm Andrea Rizzi, chair of ACIS. It's my great pleasure to have a conversation with Brigette de Poi, who did a fabulous PhD in something that I think it wouldn't be fair describing it just musicology. It's actually an incredible mix of different disciplines. It's history, social history, actually, cultural history, music, and literature as well, I would say. And it brought together an incredible piece of research on Venice in the early 17th century. So, Brigette, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm
And
very happy.
congratulations on your PhD, by the way, which I think
Thank you very much.
you were awarded your PhD fairly recently, although
Yes,
not too recently. It's been a little while already, but congratulations.
thank you very much.
So
Yes.
we've heard from Elia and Lisa about your amazing article, which has just come out with Limina. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
it
I'm so
really
happy to see it in print.
Yes, well, it's coming, and we will certainly give the details to our listeners. So if they want to track it down, they can certainly do that. Although, unfortunately, some of the academic articles sometimes are paywalled or they're difficult to get to, but we'll do our best to give you as much information as possible on where the article is or where it can be found. But we're really keen, as you have heard already, to talk a little bit more about your article and about your work. So do you mind me asking you just a couple of questions about first about Venice? What got you into Venice? What drew you to study Venice and that particular period?
Oh, it's a complex answer, that one, actually. So as you can probably tell from the fact that a lot of my research is around music, I came into the cultural studies from a music background. So my original background was in opera singing. So my first few degrees and my first career was in. And I'd always had an interest with Claudio Monteverdi. He's a very famous 17th century composer who ended his last couple decades in Venice. And so when I came to doing a master's thesis in music, I was actually looking at opera in Venice. Because in 1637 is when opera was commercialized. Public opera as a concept happened in Venice. And so that's what I was studying. Also, there's a family background in Venice. My grandparents are from that part of the world. I still have a lot of family
Ah,
there. So it was always kind of naturally moving back to Venice. I've spent my whole life there visiting family, and I love it.
fantastic. Well, you were destined to sort of do this project.
Yes.
Um, and I suppose, I guess my next question is that what then drew you to focus on this specific moment of the history of Venice and also, as we just said, the history of music in Venice and what appears to be from your research a really critical moment for the city, not just because of the plague, but also sort of a clearly it seems a shift in terms of music, culture, and society more broadly.
Yeah, so that's actually very much follow on. So as I mentioned, my master's thesis, I was looking at this 1637 commercialization of opera and how it very much shifted the role of composers from court employees who were dependent on patronage to freelance musicians who really had an option to pick their own subject matter to put on their own productions in opera houses and how that actually quite changed their financials. So I did a case study of two, Monteverdi being one immediately before opera and then a composer called Francesco Cavalli immediately after, and how their realities were quite different as composers. And I was presenting this research in 2020 at the Musicological Society of Australia's online conference. And I got asked a question by a gentleman in the audience about, so 1637 is not that long after this devastating plague in 1630s come through and would have impacted all of these people who were alive and living in Venice at the time. How do you think emotionally and career-wise this plague impacted had an influence on these later events in Venice? And I couldn't answer it. And I said, actually, I can't answer that question. I know the plague happened, as it's in all the writing, but I can't answer the question. And so I went away and started looking for answers and discovered actually no one has yet answered that question. Contacted the person who asked the question, a man called Dr. Alan Maddox, and said, hey, should we answer this together? And he ended up being my PhD supervisor.
There
So
you
that's
go.
how I ended up there.
Well, I mean, that's what research is all about, right? You've got a question, a burning question, a really difficult question, and you want to try to answer it. And I think you've answered it pretty amazingly well. So fantastic. Um, and the other thing about your question, in a way, and you mentioned that in the article, is that there are connections, almost inevitable connections, between the plague that you discuss and you do a comparative sort of study because you look at two really crucial plagues that affected Venice so badly, but also, of course, what we've been through, that is COVID. And I guess my question is, I know maybe it's a bit of a difficult question to answer in a minute, but what do you think, the research you've done, what can your work and more broadly the work that sort of scholars do, what can we do to understand and to some extent address the vulnerability of cultural industries during crises such as the one you researched and COVID and other kinds of crises?
It is a really good question. And you're right, it's one I address in actually both this article and my thesis conclusion as well. It's, one of the reasons I say in my thesis I really was interested in this work is because when I submitted my thesis in February this year, it was almost to the day 5 years after the first case of COVID hit Melbourne, where I live. And 5 years later, we are still very clearly talking about these impacts every day. The fact that I'm now working, from Zoom at home wouldn't have happened 6 years ago in some industries. Music industries have suffered, but they've also adapted and gone online. But funnily enough, when we look at these historic plagues, a lot of the time I come up against questions of, but how can something 5 years later have been impacted by the plague 5 years before? So I've very much been using COVID as a way to look back at these plagues, A, to go, well, if we were impacted, so are they. And B, also to be like, well, how did they survive long term? One of the reasons 1630 is such a notable plague is because economically it was very different and diverse to earlier plague outbreaks. And I make that point in my article that one of the reasons this plague is so notable is economically to the industry and everyone around it, they did suffer a lot worse than other plagues. So we can look at that and go and learn from that. So, how long term were they suffering? Were they diversifying? What differences were they making? One of the points I make in my thesis is the reason the Basilica di San Marco actually recovered so well is because they diversified. They suddenly started hiring outside of their usual area of hiring. They started increasing their wages quite significantly to try and attract more potential, quite talented musicians. These musicians who, by the way, were actually the ones that brought in commercialized opera and created it in Venice. And so we can use all these examples to look and see plagues have always happened, pandemics have always happened, creative industries have always been hit by it, and we still exist. So what have we done in the past to make sure that we still exist? And can we learn from what they've done?
Great. And I have a terrible sense of humor, so I'm going to say it. We're on the same boat, right? So
I say that a lot. All the same gondola in this
on the
case.
same gondola, exactly, exactly. Look, Bridget, thanks so much for this conversation and congratulations again. Your research is fascinating. And as I said, we're going to put the details of your work in the description of the podcast. So thank you very, very much and wish you all the best with your career. And hopefully we're going to see you again on this little podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Bye.
Well, that was most interesting, wasn't it?
It sure was. I really like the reflection on how the past can help us with present challenges in the creative industry. Whatever we do as a society, let's look after our musicians, please.
Sono d'accordissimo.
If you'd like to read Brigitte's work, you can find it via a link in this episode's description. So, it is time for us to go. Grazie per il vostro ascolto e a presto.
Un grazie anche da me. A presto. This series is produced by the Australasian Centre for Italian Studies using a Gen AI platform. The hosts' voices are artificial, while the authors are original. The episodes are edited by Andrea Rizzi, with the assistance and approval of the authors responsible for the research discussed in each episode. If you would like to contribute, please write to admin@acis.org.au.